Hello, and welcome to another episode of Coup Save America. Friends, the re-election of Donald Trump over Kamala Harris was a hard blow for many. And after the events of last Tuesday, many of my friends, family, and neighbors have given in to fear, depression, and even outright panic. While these reactions are understandable, and I can certainly empathize with all of these emotions, I find myself feeling oddly serene and uncharacteristically optimistic. I've done my best to project an aura of balance and reason, reminding myself that it is often in the depths of despair when hope and resilience tend to emerge. Look, it's a familiar paradigm that things must often get worse before they get better. This is a fundamental truth in medicine, in recovery, and in social progress. Consider the treatment of a serious illness, chemotherapy, a brutal process that can make patients feel as though they're at death's door. But it is often necessary to cure cancer. It's an example of what is called treatment first, comfort later, where short-term pain opens the door to long-term healing. Likewise, surgery can leave patients bedridden and weak before they regain strength and function. Believe me, I know this more than anybody else. These analogies hold true in the realm of social change and progress, too. Societies often experience turmoil before seeing meaningful transformation. In today's political climate, Trump's re-election may feel like a national crisis, and in some ways, it very well is. But remember, it is in times like these that action can be born from the need to confront the structural injustices that enable Trump's rise in the first place. As we face these difficult years ahead, and yes, they will be difficult, we have an opportunity to reevaluate, rebuild, and reimagine a political system that works for everyone. Rather than the 2024 election marking a moment for surrender, this can, and frankly must be, a rallying cry for a brighter, more unified, and more progressive future. In the wake of yet another disheartening election loss, it's time for the Democratic Party to face a hard truth. Their strategy has failed, and they have lost the trust and confidence of the American people. This defeat is not an anomaly, but a symptom of a systemic issue that has plagued the party for many decades. Instead of supporting and championing the needs of working people and addressing urgent national issues, the Democratic leadership has constantly prioritized the interests of corporate donors, leaning into neoliberal policies that betray the values of economic justice and social progress. This latest electoral spanking is the public's cry for change, a resounding rejection of the party's current course. Unfortunately, history suggests that the Democratic Party will learn little, if anything, from this defeat. Time and time again, when faced with loss, the party has pointed fingers at voters instead of reflecting on its own failures, doubling down on the same ineffective strategy that alienates its base and strengthens the opposition. In response to voter disillusionment, Democratic leaders have repeatedly chosen to pivot further to the right, seeking to capture an imagined Republican vote or centrist vote that barely exists. And as a result, they risk repeating the same pattern of failure in election after election. The ongoing problem remains unacknowledged and unaddressed. The Democratic Party insists on prioritizing corporate donors and neoliberal policies, a strategy that has been disastrous for the very people they claim to represent. Rather than supporting policies with overwhelming public support, for instance, universal health care, affordable education, and stronger labor protections, the party has embraced a corporate-friendly agenda that has led to stagnating wages, rising inequality, and dwindling opportunities for the middle class. According to Pew Research, nearly 70% of Americans support Medicare for all. Yet the Democratic establishment continues to push for incremental, piecemeal healthcare reforms. And this disconnect has not gone unnoticed by voters, many of whom feel abandoned by a party that once served as a voice for the working class. The Democratic Party's alienation of its base is evident in recent voter turnout patterns. Take, for instance, in 2020, despite high overall turnout, millions of disillusioned voters chose to either abstain or vote third party rather than cast their ballots for establishment Democrats. This disengagement stems from a fundamental mistrust in the party's commitment to its own principles. With more and more Americans identifying as independents than as members of either major party, the Democratic Party is in danger of losing a significant share of the electorate to either apathy or alternative parties if they do not pivot toward meaningful change. For years, the Democratic leadership has been dominated by figures who prioritize a neoliberal agenda. Individuals like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Hakeem Jeffries, who have shown little willingness to champion transformative policies. Under their watch, their party has come to embody the very status quo that many Americans fundamentally oppose. Neoliberal policies, characterized by deregulation, privatization, and pro-corporate stances, have exacerbated wealth inequality and failed to address the root causes of economic instability. Incumbent Democrats are people who have built their careers on corporate donations, people who have benefited personally and financially from policies that favor big business over ordinary citizens. They have little incentive to change course because the system, as it stands, works for them. It doesn't work for you or me, but it works for them. And they intend to keep it that way. To these leaders, an election loss isn't a wake-up call. It's a minor inconvenience. And guess what? It's an opportunity for more fundraising. They will blame the voters. They will blame third parties. And they will blame us divisive progressives. And what will they do next? Well, they'll march on, doubling down on the very strategy that led to their defeat in the first place. The Democratic Party has effectively become a graveyard for progressive aspirations, a political entity that many view as irredeemable and disconnected from the needs of ordinary Americans. To understand the potential for transformative change, we need only look back to the Democratic Party's own history. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the last truly progressive Democratic president, enacted a series of reforms that reshaped the nation and cemented the party's reputation as a force for social and economic justice. FDR's New Deal programs, which include Social Security, the Works Progress Administration, and the Civilian Conservation Corps, provided relief, recovery, and reform to a nation reeling from the Great Depression. His policies were not only widely popular, but also profoundly impactful, lifting millions out of poverty and establishing a precedent for federal responsibility in promoting the welfare of all its citizens. FDR, remember, was elected to 4 terms because he directly addressed the struggles of ordinary Americans, earning their trust through bold, populist measures that put their needs first. So successful was FDR in challenging the status quo that Congress, after many previous attempts, was finally able to pass a constitutional amendment limiting presidential terms. Here's a fun fact. The National Constitution Center suggests that bigotry was in fact the driving force behind the successful ratification of the 22nd Amendment, as Southern Democrats, fearing government promotion of civil rights programs, joined together with Republicans. But FDR's legacy demonstrates the power of progressive populism and how policies grounded in a commitment to economic equality and social justice can not only energize the base, but also garner widespread support of voters across the political spectrum, from Democrats to Republicans. Let's face it, the Democratic Party is on a fast track to irrelevance. The Democrats' failure to embrace the spirit of FDR has led many to conclude that the party must either be entirely dismantled and rebuilt or replaced altogether. The question is, which will it be? Did you know that nearly 57% of Americans, according to Gallup, believe that a third major political party is necessary? And this isn't a fringe opinion. It's mainstream. Is this where our political system is inevitably headed? Can the Democratic Party be reformed, or is it beyond saving? These are questions that we need to ask ourselves. But I'll tell you what, if the Democratic Party has any hope of survival, it must start with a complete overhaul, a total purge of the neoliberal leadership that has driven it into the ground. Pelosi, Schumer, Jeffries, and anyone else who continues to champion a centrist corporate agenda, they need to go. Only by purging the party of its neoliberal influence can Democrats regain the trust of their disenfranchised and disenchanted base and offer a credible alternative to right-wing populism. Friends, it's time for new blood, for leaders who are not afraid to fight for the radical change this country so desperately needs. It's time for leadership that is fired up to fight for populist issues like raising the minimum wage, paid family leave, and affordable paths to higher education. It means tackling wealth inequality head on by taxing the super rich and redistributing those funds to lift up working families. It means addressing climate change not as an inconvenient problem, but as the existential threat to humanity that requires immediate action that it is. Universal health care policy, again supported by a majority of Americans, should be the cornerstone of a renewed democratic platform. These aren't just left-wing ideas. These are, again, are ideas that resonate with the American people. Poll after poll shows strong public support for these policies. Yet the Democratic Party has shied away from embracing them in full or even in part. They've treated these ideas as if they're radical, as if they're liabilities, when in fact they're the very key to winning back the trust and enthusiasm of voters. Meanwhile, the threat of right-wing populism bears down on us as both a warning and an opportunity. The rise of figures like Donald Trump underscores the dangers of the Democratic Party's neoliberal complacency. While Trump's policies are indeed harmful and his rhetoric dangerous, he has nonetheless tapped into a populist sentiment that resonates with so many Americans. Trump represents a kind of, well, a bull in a china shop analogy for our political system. His reckless governance and disregard for norms are ultimately damaging, yet they expose the extent of American frustration with the status quo. The Democratic Party should recognize this as an opportunity to rally the American people around a different kind of populism, one rooted in progressive, inclusive values rather than divisive rhetoric. As we look ahead to the 2028 election, we must remember that change does not happen overnight. The corporate wing of the Democratic Party may have been weakened, but it is still very much alive and very much a force to be reckoned with. If we want to build a progressive future, we must hold the party accountable every step of the way. This means demanding that Democrats stand firm on issues like healthcare, climate change, and economic justice. Issues that, I repeat once again, resonate with the majority of the American people. The midterms in 2 years will be a critical test. If we can harness the energy and frustration of this moment, we can make significant gains in Congress, paving the way for a legislative agenda that reflects progressive values. The importance of these midterm elections cannot be overstated. By focusing on grassroots organizing, by mobilizing young voters, and by emphasizing policies that directly benefit working families, we can build momentum for a more progressive future. Look, we can either accept the status quo upheld by both of our country's major political parties, or we can come together as Americans to build a new vision for America, a vision rooted in justice, equality, and sustainability. Only by confronting the failures of the past and embracing the vision of leaders like FDR can the Democratic Party, or perhaps an entirely new party, rise to the challenges that we face in the 21st century. And that, my friends, is the final word up front. I am, of course, Sean Sainhart, and this is Coup Save America. You know, on another note, our country deserves as many chances as it takes to get it right. And our guest today is a firm believer in second, third, and even fourth chances. John David Graham is the founder and executive director of Good Samaritan Home, and he'll be joining our conversation right after the break. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Today, I'd like to introduce you to the inspirational John David Graham. After a bumpy start in life, filled with career changes and periods of homelessness himself, John finally emerged and found his life's calling. At age 53, when he launched Good Samaritan Home, a nonprofit agency helping people restart their lives after prison. John's personal journey has molded him into an ideal mentor to support others in developing the life skills they need to move forward. Since its founding in 2001, Good Samaritan Home has expanded from a single residence to an amazing 17 houses across 3 counties, helping literally thousands of men and women reintegrate into our society. John's good work is a testament to the power of what a single individual can do to uplift his community, or rather what a dedicated couple can do, since much of John's inspiration has come from his social worker wife, Kathy. John went on to earn a doctorate in applied theology at age 61. Then, at age 75, he published his award-winning debut novel, Running as Fast as I Can, a fictionalized story of one man's journey to overcome an abusive background, to find forgiveness and love. I am excited to hear about how John's calloused hands and a tender heart have made such impactful changes in people's lives. So please bring your hands together and let's welcome John to the show. John.
Sean, it's very good to be here. And also, I was listening to every word you had to say, and I was having all sorts of flashbacks to my own past hearing you talk. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on the program. Let me turn my volume up a little bit so I can hear you better. There we go. So I want to ask you, you have led an amazing life. You have had so many challenges, and you are, well, I have to say, you are a true inspiration. And it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And I think your message is something that really resonates with what we're going through as a nation today. A story about forgiveness, overcoming obstacles, and moving forward in life. And so I just want to kind of ask you, how did you start off in life? What was tell me your story.
It's interesting. Not interesting is the best word, but
No, interesting.
I was raised in the 50s and 60s near Pittsburgh in the steel mill towns.
Okay.
So everybody worked in the mill because it was the Clairton Steel Works. So it was a company town. And we were brought up to believe that you simply go, you graduate high school and you go to the mill, you get a job, you have a family, and then you retire in 30 years, then you die, and that's it.
Right.
So I left. In fact, I defined my family in the novel as being we lived at the same address, we ate at the same table, but we had the same last name, but we were strangers. We all lived alone together. So I left Pittsburgh and went to college thinking that I could do something different with my life, but I had no direction. So I ended up in college, and it was in the late 60s, and that's the height of all the social turmoil.
Yes.
And at one point, I ended up not knowing what I believed and where, because I was raised in a very conservative Christian tradition. But when I got to college, I started questioning, and everything around us was questioning. So I graduated college with more doubts than I had answers. But what happened was, you factor in the times. I went to Kent, Ohio, to see a girl, and that was the May 4th, 1970. And here I was on Kent State looking for a girl, and literally the world was coming apart around us. And I didn't know that at the time because I had left Kent, went down to Ohio State. I heard about this, and we got involved in a protest on the same day as the Kent State killing.
Wow.
We knew there were killings, and I just walked in like most people in the 60s. There were some protest leaders, but most of us were just at these places to meet girls. And we were just, and I was there. I was just looking, and I was on Ohio State campus on the day of the killing, and there was a ROTC protest, and the guard came and they surrounded us. They drew their guns, and I did not know what was going to happen that day, and it scared the bejesus out of me.
I can imagine, yeah.
And because all we heard every day was campus bombings, campus riots, protests, They were shutting down Washington at the time. And I left that protest with a very disillusioned view of not just my culture, but my country.
Right.
I was scheduled to join the Air Force, and I just withdrew that name. I was an officer candidate, and I dropped out and ended up going to Detroit and applying for a conscientious objector status because of what I determined was if we can kill our own, what's next? And so I spent 2 years in Detroit in alternative service, they call it. That's where you can do your military obligations in a socially conscious manner that benefits the community. So I worked in an orphanage for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And I got an education that I couldn't believe. I was surrounded by kids who grew up with no family. They grew up, if you're lucky, you had a mother who was sometimes there, but usually it was a grandma. And so I got a real education there. But what happened was I left that college experience with such a jaded view that I never entered the voting booth for 30 years.
Wow.
30 years. And so that's where all of this going from job to job to job came. I was a children's home counselor. I was a truck driver. I was a building contractor. I was a journalist at one point, and I even tried my hand at being a minister, thinking that I could do teaching.
Right.
What I found was the church was more political
Yeah.
than I was comfortable with. And so I just didn't do that well. And I'm not trying to malign the church, but I was trying to be more of a prophetic voice, and they wanted a good luck charm.
Yeah.
So here I am. I was 53 years old, had gone through 8 careers. I had a family I had raised, going from state to state to state, trying to find my place. And I was, again, I'd been homeless in the middle of that. And so we were, again, about to be homeless. And so my wife, Kathy, and I decided that we're going to do something. Maybe at the latter half of our life, we can do something that has an impact. So we bought the cheapest house, the oldest house in town, and said, we're going to use it as a shelter.
And where is this at? This is in Ohio?
Yes, we ended up in Western Ohio.
Okay.
And it was a fluke because I had no previous roots in Ohio. But it turned out to be just instrumental because what happened was we started this shelter, and one thing led to another. Is literally in our own house. We had opened our house to strangers thinking we could help them. The next year, we scraped together some money and bought a house next door and remodeled it for 2 years because my construction background allowed me to do that. And then we had a formal shelter, and that's when the Department of Correction came to us and said, we have this idea for community rehabilitation. We feel that based on our studies at the University of Cincinnati, that there is a need for in-community rehabilitation instead of in prison.
Yes.
And because number one, the dollars said so, because we're building more prisons that aren't working. So if we could spend half as much in community, then the men and women could be working, paying child support, paying taxes, buying goods in the community, and
Right.
the low-risk offenders will gravitate to that. And the high-risk offenders can maintain the prison.
So let me just ask you a quick question. So was this proposal based on the idea that instead of sending them to prison, we'll send them to this rehabilitation home, or was this for people that were already in prison to be released?
It was post-release control, they call it. These are people who are coming out on prison. They have a designated release date. They have to be released. But the studies found that if they're homeless, they are very likely to be repeat offenders.
Yes. Well, that makes sense.
The number one issue is safe, affordable housing. So we became a vendor or a partner with the Department of Correction, and we offered a temporary shelter for, say, 90 days or 6 months or a year at no charge, and they would pay us a per diem, and that's how we paid our bills because we were a nonprofit and we were not there for profit. We were there just to serve the community. And one thing led to another, and we had 4 beds and then 8 beds. And now, when I wrote to you, we had 17 houses, but now it's actually 19.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, it's because the need for affordable reentry. I don't call it rehabilitation because many of the people we work with, they have grown up with so few skills that we call it habilitation. We're actually teaching very basic things like when you make your bed in the morning so that at least you have control of that corner of your life,
Right.
or you're accountable to your roommate or your housemate because that shows respect for one another. And here's how you get a job, or here's how you apply for a job, or better yet, here's how you dress for a job application.
Right.
Basic stuff that you and I may take for granted. But over the past 23 years, we've been able to help in some degree almost nearly 2,500 men and women.
Wow.
So it's been extremely successful, not because of what we've done. We've simply given a hand out so to help them up. We're not trying to give something without some accountability.
Right. What has been the biggest challenge that you faced? I mean, like there's a lot of. Well, let me ask you a quick question. I know that a big problem with these types of programs is that the community in general is not very supportive. You know, they don't want prisoners next door to them living in their neighborhoods. How have you overcome that challenge?
Not in my backyard, we call it.
Yes.
Yeah, in my naivety, when our first man came from prison, the chaplain had referred him to us, and he came, and he was coming out of Cleveland, and we're in rural, white, uh, Western Ohio, and so just the difference between Cleveland and these small Western rural farm towns is the perception is that all prisons, all criminals are coming from the city, and they're always those people. There's always a racial underpinning to it.
Right.
Even though statistically there are more white people in prison than there are black. It's just the felt perception is. And so when Reggie came to us, he was coming across state to a white community, and he said he was more afraid of us than they were of him.
Yeah.
But so I tried to help salve the fears in the community by doing an interview with the newspaper, and I thought this will help get support. It did the opposite. There were immediately petitions to shut down our house. There were appeals to the city council. There were council ordinances passed. It got so there were letters to the editor where there were threatening. At one point, I had police protection going to a council meeting.
Wow.
It was so heated. In fact, it got so severe that I was at the courthouse trying to meet with somebody, and somebody tried to stab me, and it just grazed me. But what amazed me was how quickly it happens. You never see it coming.
Yeah.
But what was most tragic was the letters to the editor that followed, where people were willing to put up bail so the guy could get out of jail and finish the job. That to me, that was the most not frightening, but it was the most disheartening.
Disheartening. Well, absolutely. Yeah.
And it was tough. Now I will say this, that I understand. I really do understand their fears because they were feeling what they'd seen on TV. They were feeling what all the racial issues that we've been facing for 30 years. And so what I would go to the council meetings with reams of data, and I would try to present the facts, show that we can save money, show that this is humanitarian, the moral thing to do. And nobody gives a damn. So, they just this gaping yawn when you're talking.
Yeah.
So what I ended up doing was taking out a snowblower, and every time it would snow, I would plow the sidewalks all around the block, and I would do the neighbors and the neighbors' neighbors, and I never said a word. And snow after snowfall, we eventually were able to make an impact that we were not a threat on the community. And by fixing up our house, it was I spent 14 years remodeling and renovating this house. It became a model of our program, trying to make something that was broken into something renewed.
Right.
And now it's a 1879 Victorian that actually looks like it's a comforting place to be. But I will say this, Sean, that those same people that they used to wave at us with one finger, They now use all their fingers.
How long did it take for them to kind of come around?
Uh, I would say, well, we had legal battles. I had to sue the city 3 times. So I would say it was at least 7 years, at
Seven
least.
years.
Yeah, and I think maybe what helped most was we started moving our work into the city of Dayton, which is 35 miles away. So we still maintain our work in my little town called Greenville, but it's primarily the local people being referred to us. So, and what changed everything was heroin, because when we found that heroin was not a city issue, it was an us issue.
Yeah.
And we were getting people who were sons and daughters and cousins and even parents of local community people who were addicted from oxys to heroin. And so they were in the court system and they were being rejected by their family. We took them in. And so we were helping. It was clear that we were helping the local community with their people.
Yeah.
And then our work in Dayton grew from 1 house to 2 houses. Now I think we have 12 houses in Dayton and 10 staff.
Wow.
So, I like to tell people that the best sermon I ever preached was with a snowblower.
Well, and that's what really it's all about is community outreach, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Because I want to convince people with the data, but nobody hears data. I had a friend of mine, he was a wise old mentor, and he said, nobody cares what you know. They
Yeah.
only want to know you care. And the trouble with presenting data is you can come across as condescending and aloof. And
Yeah.
we're seeing that in politics today, where people are. We think that's probably a major reason that the Republicans are in power because they felt condescended by many on the liberal side.
Yeah. And they have a point. They really do have a point. I mean, there's a lot of condescension. There's a lot of elitism going on on the left.
Yeah, yeah. We call it the nanny state, where I know what's best for you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've had to be very careful. I don't get pulled into politics because we have found that Republican governors and Democrat governors, and even though Ohio is a very red state, they found that economically rehabilitation makes sense, but also there's this moral core that if you can see that you're actually benefiting the community, people will support it, regardless of your political persuasion.
Yeah.
So I'm very fortunate there.
That's one thing that I understand the fear that exists around what's going on politically. I get that. What I like to try to tell people is that, you know what? At the end of the day, we're all Americans. We're all human beings. And hating your neighbor and being afraid of your neighbor is no way to live, and it's no way to sustain a country. And we have to come together. We have to have conversations. We have to reach out, and we can hate the system, but we have to love our neighbor. We have to be willing to reach out and talk to people and learn from their perspective. Because otherwise, I mean, so much of what we have today in this nation is these echo chambers where you're either on the left or you're on the right, and the other side is looked upon as the enemy. And we have to overcome that, don't we?
It's ironic that this election, there was so much angst, anxiety,
Yes.
and anger, just outright anger and violence coming into it. And now one side is convinced the other side is going to try to destroy everything.
Yes.
And both sides it reminds me of 1858, where they're both sides convinced the country's coming apart. And what I've concluded is that this is a perfect opportunity for people who want to make a difference simply by doing the work you do of bringing hope. And since I've been doing these podcasts, I have this simple message of second chances, and I found a tremendous outpouring of support for this idea of the hope that it comes with it.
Yeah.
So I hate to say this, but maybe Mr. Trump has given me a real platform for bring hope to people.
I'm definitely afraid, of what could happen. I mean, there could be people, vulnerable populations, that could be negatively affected by this. But I always tell people too that the alternative to that, the real change, comes at the community level,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we can counteract the worst of our national impulses by simply coming together and helping our neighbors and starting in the community. That's where change starts. It starts in our backyards. It starts in our neighborhoods, in our cities, in our towns, in our counties, and at the state level. And we could really make a strong impact. But we have to come together to do that. And are you finding people are more receptive to this idea of coming together and working towards a common good?
Uh, it's hard to tell because things have been so jaded the past
Yes.
several months. I'm thinking that maybe now it will calm down at least. What I am seeing though is I'm seeing on the left, I'm seeing a lot of the finger pointing that they're blaming this part of the left and that part of the left and
Yeah.
racism, sexism, genderism, whatever ism you want to call it. And I think what it still comes down to is we have an opportunity here to simply do what you do best and that make your little corner.
Yeah.
Maybe it's only helping the lady across the street. Maybe it's only using your snowblower.
Yeah.
Maybe that's all you can do.
Yeah. Because
But
I think overall, people, no matter what their political persuasions may be, people are good people. People want essentially the same things. They want safety, they want love, they want community. You know, these are things that we all share in common. And we have to move beyond the politics of things.
the critics, for about 2 years there, I was the number one story in the local newspaper, and it was always with vitriolic comments. And uh, what I found though is that if you don't respond to that negatively, if you don't get into the same level, and it's so easy to say, your mother's ugly too. Yeah, it does no good. And I keep coming back to I grew up reading a lot of Dr. King's works, and my doctoral work put a lot of emphasis on that because it was about rehabilitation and reentry. And Dr. King spoke a great deal about what he called the beloved community.
Yes.
Uh, the idea that you can make a difference and you can create a community of love and compassion, but it is based on a moral order. It's not simply, you can't legislate morality. It has to come from within you. And that's
Yes.
why I'm a Christian, because I believe in the basic tenets that there is a moral order. It's just a matter of responding to that. And you know, that's why we are a faith-based organization. We don't require that of others, but we require that we act accordingly.
Accordingly. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what it
That
motivates us.
absolutely. What I'm curious, you mentioned habilitation earlier.
Yes.
Can you kind of differentiate that between traditional rehabilitation?
Well, I think what I think of it as rehabilitation is where you try to retool or you try to give somebody a specific trade.
Right.
Say that I'm going to help you learn how to drive this forklift so that you can qualify and work in a factory as a forklift driver, which is very good. We did that in Pittsburgh when the mills closed in the 70s and 80s, and they were training everybody in computers as much as you can train a 45-year-old man to run a Windows computer. But the whole city, literally our country had to go from industrial to service oriented, and it was
Yeah.
extremely tumultuous. Uh, but the end result is that we have a whole generation growing up through that tumult. And so what we teach, I call it habilitation, in that we're just doing real basic things like uh, we require that you make your bed in the morning. And it's not because of any sort of discipline, it's out of respect.
Right.
Because what got you to prison is this idea of, I want this, I'm going to do this for me. And by making your bed, you're saying to your roommate, out of respect for you, I'm going to make my bed. So it's a pronoun switch, and it's going from I to we.
Right.
But the most important part is that if you go out looking for a job and you're rejected 6 times, 10 times, a dozen times, and you will be, particularly if you have a box that says, have you committed a felony? You have to check it. and they immediately assume the worst. So
Yes.
you're going to have to work twice as hard, as Dr. King said, just to reach the starting line. So what we're trying to teach people is endurance. And that's the thing that you should have learned in your family.
Right.
The idea of getting up and going to work, or at least looking for work. So we're teaching, it's an old Navy SEAL trick that at the end of the day, that you may come back after all these rejections and you look at your room, you look at your bed, and you say, at least I did that right.
Right.
At least I have some control over my life. So, but we have found that again and again and again, the people we deal with are coming out of a destructive or a dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
And they not that makes them guiltless. It just makes it understandable that what they learned to do was survive in the street.
Yeah.
And that's what I've tried to continually hammer home. I'm not here to absolve you from your sins. I'm here to help you overcome them.
Overcome them. Yeah. Yeah. How, and can you share some success stories that you've had?
Well, the first one, Reggie, when he came, it was difficult because he was in our own house, and it was actually not frightening, but real close to it for my wife. Because here's this strange man, and
Yeah.
he's just come out of prison, and many people from the city, by community, talk louder, and so when you talk loud, it can be threatening.
Right.
And so my wife had an extra lock put on our bedroom door, and that creates barriers. So when we actually did the other house, it made everybody more comfortable. But Reggie stayed with us, um, and he was there, oh, I'd say about a year. And then he left, and he stayed in town, though, because he got a job, and he reunited with his daughter, and eventually got married. And it's been over 20 years. He called me because he'd moved away, and he called me and said, I'm an over-the-road truck driver, and I happened to read your book, and I just wanted to tell you I enjoyed it, and I just want to say hi. So Reggie has been out for over 20 years.
Wow.
But here's the most, I think, the most personal example. We had a man named Jimmy who was referred to us because they found him in his truck. The truck broke down in the winter, and he was 67 years old. It was below freezing, and he was near death.
Oh,
And he
jeez.
also had mental health issues. So they said, "Will you take him?" And so we took him into our house, and he stayed with us. Uh, and we helped him get stable with his medication through the VA. And he stayed with us 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Jimmy stayed with us 14 years. And when he eventually died, when he was 81, he said, "This was the only home I ever had." That to me was worth it all. And Jimmy had nothing to give to us, nothing. But I think he embodied the story of Lazarus in the Bible, where the beggar at the gate, and the rich man kept walking by him and ignoring him. And my wife always said, "I can't ignore him because I'm accountable to God."
Yeah. How much does being in prison, I mean, because you do become institutionalized. It's a very debilitating and dehumanizing experience. I imagine that comes with a whole host of mental health issues that can be very difficult to overcome. Do you provide counseling and stuff like that?
Well, we partner with the local mental health and the Job and Family Services and the Reentry Coalition, because what we found is if I try to do it all,
Right.
I'll do it poorly. So what we try to do is we do what the community needs. They need housing. My background allowed me to do that, and so I'm able to provide that housing to help them do their jobs. So uh, the Veterans Association, the Veterans Hospital, the Job and Family Services, so they provide the food stamps. Then we have a lot of local pantries that are very involved. So we see our role as basically mentoring, just trying to provide a safe place and to encourage you to connect at the other places. The best example, Sean, is that the Dayton Montgomery County has a reentry coalition, which is just first class, and they have a training session for 8 weeks, and so they provide free training for how to apply for a job, how to dress for a job, can you get hired? Who's looking to hire you?
Right.
Even provide a suit for you for your graduation from the training. And we have in fact, this is Tuesday, Thursday. We're having a graduation, and I have 5 men from our program who'll be going there. And the one of the guys named Christopher came to my staff, and he said, "I want to show you the suit I've got." He paraded through the house with his suit on because he'd never worn a suit in his life, and he's so proud because he graduated from something.
Yeah.
So that to me, we couldn't do that, but the county, through their expertise and their funding, they can do it, and we provide the housing to help them.
How is the funding where you are?
Well, Ohio, let's suppose it costs you $90 or more per day to house somebody in prison.
Right.
That means every day, and uh, but if they're in the community and you can house somebody for half of that or a third of that, and so that you immediately save $50 a day. But when somebody's in the community, they get a job, they're paying child support.
Right.
Because everybody has $50,000 child back bills they can't pay because they're in prison. So you start to pay that back, and then also you're earning an income, so you also will buy things in the community.
Right.
And you pay taxes on your income, and more than that, you bring stability to the community because you're going to come back, and if you come back right from prison without any sort of support, you'll go where you're welcomed, and that's usually the old guys, the old neighborhood, and the old issues. So I like to say that reentry, like we're doing, is appealing to the Democrats because it's morally acceptable, and
Yes.
it's appealing to the Republicans because it's fiscally acceptable.
Right.
So everybody wins. So and we are able to we now have 19 houses, and we on any given day we can house upwards of 100 men and women, and it's not just short term. We have some long term housing, and because somebody who's only making $900 a month can't afford $600 in rent.
Yeah.
So we have an affordable rent program to help them, and they can stay long term.
How long can people stay? I mean, you mentioned one guy that stayed for over 20 years.
Yeah, we created a program called transitional housing where if you come to us through the state referral and you're with us for a year, and then you're supposed to get your own place, but if you're not able to because you can't afford it,
Yeah.
you make on disability you make $740 a month. You can't live on that.
No.
So what we offer is a boarding house arrangement where somebody can stay indefinitely. They have their own secure locked room, but a common living area, common kitchen, and then they have maybe 2 or 3 roommates or housemates, and we set the rent because they have to pay for that, but it's according to their income. And the idea is that we're teaching rehabilitation through their money management.
Right.
We don't control it, but we help you work out a budget. And the idea is it's passive mentoring is what it is.
So what first kind of inspired you to start? Now, you had mentioned that the corrections came to you with this proposal. But before that, you were doing something very similar. Was that with homeless people in general, or?
Well, what happened was when I was single, I was homeless at the time. I was living in a truck, and they repossessed my truck because I hadn't made payments. You know, the usual story. Because I had a degree but no skills, and so I met my wife, and she was working. She had a house, and it's amazing how attractive you can be when you have a house.
Yeah.
But I assure you, I paid her back ever since then. But the point is, meeting my wife brought a degree of stability that I never had, but I never forgot that experience. And so when at one point when I've gone through all these job changes, and I thought, well, maybe I can become a teacher in the church, and I can, because the church, coming from Dr. King's perspective, was the spear's edge of the community transition. The church had the authority to actually make a change in the community. And I had that idea going into it, and I found that it wasn't there for me because would have somebody come to me and ask for help, and I couldn't help them. The church wasn't responsive to it. It was saying not in my backyard,
Yeah.
and so I became very disillusioned with the church, but I still had that same passion to help people who had been like me, and so that's why we said, let's start a shelter and let's do without restraints, do what we feel to be the right thing to do. And we could only afford our own house. And I don't recommend that for anybody, but it was all we could afford to do at the time.
Right. What are some of the things that you learned about yourself during this process?
Well, the truth is I'm an introvert. I deeply prefer being alone. And I found that I have to be in my work an extrovert, but I don't do well meeting and greeting, just casual conversation. But what I do very well is one-on-one. So, an example, I went to one of our houses, and the guys were sitting on the porch, and so I just walked up and sat down with them, and we didn't talk about anything in particular. We just talked. How's it going with your work? How are you doing here in the neighborhood? Tell me about your family. And they talked, and I listened, and they talked, and I listened. And after about an hour, when I left, one of the guys said, I really appreciate what you said. And I didn't say anything. I just listened. And I came out of there feeling like this is my life's purpose. I didn't change anything. I didn't necessarily, he didn't jump up and say, I now see Jesus and my life is forever changed. What he said was, thanks for the time. But he changed me that day because I felt like I had a much better day because I came in feeling pretty blue and I left feeling much, much better. So
Yeah.
I've learned that even an introvert, if you listen, you can sound eloquent.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I'm kind of an introvert myself. I get very nervous, meeting people, and even one-on-one is very difficult for me. But I'm starting to overcome that in a lot of ways, because you have to. You have to kind of fight that impulse, don't you?
It's exhausting though.
It is.
And right now I'm in Texas, so this is my writer's house, and I come down here to write, and I've been here for almost 2 weeks, and I don't talk to anybody. I mean, you're it.
Well, thank you.
But I may go all day long. The only thing I say during their entire days when I drive to McDonald's, the drive-through, and say, one Diet Coke. And that's the extent of my conversations all day.
Have you found that there were, because we all have biases and stuff in the back of our minds that we have to learn to overcome. Were there any biases or fears that you had going into this that surprised you in terms of how it really changed you in that respect?
I honestly didn't have any fear, even when it was hostile. I have to be careful saying this, but I found that the more hostile the environment, the more that was at stake, I found my mind to be extremely clear. And it was like the adrenaline rush that you get when you're at fight or flight.
Right.
And I found myself saying that I can do this. I just have to. It also made me extremely humble, knowing that I couldn't do it alone.
Right.
And I desperately needed my wife's support, and I needed support from people in the community that believed in this. And we could never be where we are. But I found that one person can make a difference on some level. And now I'm going to get into just a degree of politics here.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, this is a good place for it, right?
Yes.
What has most upset me and disappointed me has been what I call moral people in government who made positions that were very clear. And then when the wind changed, they reversed them
Yes.
without missing a beat and said, I don't believe that anymore. I believe this. And that is what I call the fourth temptation in the wilderness. It's where the devil tempts you with power.
Yes.
And you don't realize how subtle that is because you think I can still do the work I want to do. But if you compromise in these basic areas, you will change and you won't want to do those works anymore. So
Yeah.
I'm not so upset with all the pronouncements from Mr. Trump, even though I don't agree with them. What I'm most upset with is all the sycophants around him that are just looking for power
Yeah.
and to be at the right and the left hand of the throne.
Yeah.
And that to me is most discouraging.
Yeah. And I always differentiate the people, the citizens, from the politicians. The politicians are in positions of power,
Yes,
and they want to hold on to that power, often by whatever means is necessary. The people, on the other hand, are the ones that want real change, and they're the ones that we've come to a point where people just don't believe anymore that they can make a difference in the world.
it's the indifference that I felt coming out of Vietnam. And it took me 30 years, and I'm afraid, and we're seeing it among uh, my granddaughter, who's in college now, said that she's having a hard time finding boys who have any degree of energy. They seem to be passive and just looking at their phone all day long.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
removed, and she's goal oriented. And I have a feeling that she's not seeing an anomaly. I have a feeling that's common.
No, I think you're right.
Yeah,
And what is attributing to that, do you think?
I'm sorry.
What is attributing to that, do you think?
One more time, please.
Well, what do you think is attributing to this?
Oh, well, I think uh, part of it was information overload.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's real easy for me to put on the cable news network, and they all. I have found the fundamentalism on the left, on the right, and there's a finger pointing on the left and the right, and the only clear voice of reason I've seen is coming out of PBS with David Brooks, where I respect his views because he's nuanced enough to know that it's gray.
Yeah,
And
right.
there are several people like that. And I've seen people come. Atlantic Magazine's another one. I've seen many articles coming out of there where they're wrestling with these issues and looking at both sides of it. And but most people are looking for bumper stickers. It's like the old Loretta Lynn song. You're the reason our kids are ugly.
Yeah,
So you got to blame your spouse for something.
yeah. People are looking for shortcuts.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so what I've been doing is I've been doing a lot of videos promoting my book, but also it's evolved into promoting the idea of second chances.
Right.
And I've learned that well, I can do an article on Substack that's more nuanced and more developed, but I have about a minute to get the same theme across on TikTok. And I've been able to develop an audience of people who can feel, they can feel that same passion for second chances.
Yeah.
In fact, I've been amazed at the response from people saying that, I felt that or I understand that. I've been there. So I think particularly in this day and age, the answer is to offer hope in
Right.
some way. You
That's
have to be that
difficult
hope.
in these times because the people are not feeling hopeful at all.
No, no. I talked to some family members and they're very discouraged. Uh, there's even talk of Uruguay, but
Of what?
going to Uruguay.
Uruguay. Yeah.
Yeah. So and that's common. We've seen that before. But I see this is 1956. We're in Selma. We have an opportunity, and,
Yes.
and the more I read Dr. King's responses, and the more I look at John Lewis and how he responded. John Lewis, when he spent his life in Congress with people who hated him,
Yeah.
many people still hated him. He said he never walked by anybody without calling him brother, because if I don't call him brother, it will change me.
Yeah.
And to me, that was the greatest witness he ever gave. That he did it with his feet, with his arms
Yeah.
and his legs.
How can we get people to embrace the politics of hope?
Well, I tried to do that to a degree with my novel. I started that novel when I was 22 years old. I was living in the truck. I had a Royal typewriter. I was homeless, and I started to write a story. And I realized that I hadn't lived, and I put that aside, and I just started writing notes for the past 50 years. And when I was 65, I started writing. And the idea is I tried to fictionalize this idea of coming from a dysfunctional family, that you're not responsible for birth or circumstances, but you are responsible for what you do with it.
Yeah.
And a lot of that came out of Dr. King's teaching that you may be born an outcast. You may be born in a society that rejects you by the nothing you've done. It's by happenstance of birth that you were born as a black man in the South, that you are forever a second-class citizen. But he said, if you can only be a street sweeper, if that's all you're allowed to do, then you sweep those streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. So they'll walk by you someday and say, there lives the world's greatest street sweeper. And I never forgot that. So I worked 10 years on writing that story because my background is not in novel writing. Now, I'm not trained in literature, but I tried to put the passion in the story of those of us who desperately need another chance. And Daniel Robinson's story, after 24 rewrites, I spent 3 years writing the first draft and 7 years editing.
Wow.
And I came out with what I feel to be, like one person who just read it said, she never realized I had this much emotion in me, because it allowed it to come out, and people they're identifying with Daniel Robinson, and they're saying, I came from that same situation, and if Daniel can make it, maybe I can make it.
And I want to promote the book here real quickly too. It's called Running as Fast as I Can by John David Graham, and I believe we have a trailer for the book. Would it be okay with you if we played the trailer?
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Please. Let's cue that up, please.
Your side of the bed has been cold these 30 years. This house our love built together, empty now without you. But I've never really been alone. Ghosts from my haunted past parade by me every night. People now dead, places forgotten by others. They say you get over those hurts, but you don't. A wounded body can heal, but a broken soul stays broke, and all that remains are memories of a lifetime of pain and regret. But Kate, you saved me in every way a person can be saved. Your love healed my shattered life. You were my sign from God. My heart no longer aches, not like it has all these years. You were my second chance, my reason to believe. And soon that faith will lead me back to you, running as fast as I can.
That is wonderful. I have not had a chance to read the book. I plan on doing that this weekend.
I was really taken back by the response, because like everything else in my life, when I went to publish it, I thought, I'll send it to an agent, she'll love it, and we'll sell 1 million copies, and I'll be on TV in a week. And it was rejected again and again and again, because what people don't realize is that publishing is a business.
Yes.
And all books don't sell well. The latest data I read showed that out of 58,000 books published by this one house in a given year, half of them sold less than 12 copies. Most books don't sell well.
Yeah.
But they may be good, but nobody sees them or reads them. So what I ended up doing was I was rejected 200 times by agents and publishers. So I formed a Don Quixote Press, and I hired a publicist and I hired an editor, and we've been working for a year. And that book has sold thousands of copies and garnered 25 awards. And I've been extremely pleased with the reviews from the readers who said, I cried. I had an 81-year-old man said, I stayed up till 3 a.m. I couldn't put it down. So this to me is how we sell second chances. We tell a story like Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Daniel runs through the 60s like Forrest did, and he goes through ups and downs and rejections, and Daniel had his own limp like Forrest. But in the end, he finds his Jenny. But like all stories, there are ups and downs to love. And there's love and loss, there's grief, there's pain, but there's also renewal as long as you keep running as fast as you can.
Yeah.
So
How difficult is it for people to forgive themselves? Because isn't that really the first step to healing is forgiving yourself?
I'd say that it's a lifelong, ever never ending process because it's like I make a joke about it, but Groucho Marx said that he would never belong to a club that would have him as a member. What are my words? It was funny, but I think most people feel that way. Why should someone love me
Right.
when I can't love myself? And that affects your marriage, it affects your children, it affects your job performance. And that's why I think the church, when it goes back to its basic message of service, of love and forgiveness, if we were to simply do what we say we believe, I think we could change the world.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I
just shut
agree.
up and don't say anything. Just do it.
Yeah. It's hard though. It really is hard. I mean, I struggle with forgiveness, self-forgiveness myself, and often feel like, well, I don't feel lovable. I don't feel likable. And yet I'm very forgiving of others. But when it comes to myself, I'm very self-critical, and I'm struggling to kind of overcome that.
Well, you live in a culture. We live in a culture, particularly in the internet age, where whatever you did in first grade is publicized all over the net.
Yeah.
And everybody remembers you because of what you did on that third day of school in the first grade.
Yeah.
And God forbid if you committed any sort of offense. And we write in ink. And so all our sins are non-erasable. They're impermeable. And it's like Chris Christopherson used to have a song. He said, everybody needs to have somebody look down on because people love to look down on you for what you've done. So
Yeah.
what I ended up doing is I had this theme that comes through the book again and again, where Daniel is constantly reminded that life is written in pencil and we get a lot of erasers. We can start over, but he has to be told again and again and again before it finally sinks in. And it takes a lifetime
Oh yeah.
and it takes a community. And in my
Yes.
case, it took a wife. And I hope she's listening now.
Hi, Kathy.
But I owe so much of my stability to her because she went through all the nonsense we went through and never once blinked.
Yeah. It's funny because my producer, whom you've met, Mackenzie, is a very, very dear friend. And I'm tearing up here. She changed my life. She's become my anchor. She has allowed me to love myself. She is she's an amazing, amazing woman who I love so dearly, and she's changed my life in ways that I can't even begin to imagine. So I can totally relate to what you're saying. It does. It takes another person sometimes. It's so important.
It's the exact opposite of what Hollywood portrays.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night. At my age, I'm always laying awake at night, and I'll pop open the phone and I'll go look for something on Facebook, and before you know it, you're running through the reels, and all of them are about the hard bodies, I call them, the beautiful people. And I haven't been beautiful since, never.
Yeah, me too.
So I can't compete. So imagine if you're a 14-year-old girl and you're surrounded with that false beauty that it's
Yes.
all done through the photoshopping. And so you try to relate in ways where you're accepted, not realizing that that's the exact opposite of what you need to do. So I feel very, very badly and concerned about the children growing up with this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like you said, we live in a technological age where everything is on the internet. You talked about your granddaughter and how young men now are just attached to their phones. And I think a lot of it is fear driven. Would you agree with that?
I would, when we grew up, we were always worried about the nuclear bomb. We would have
Yeah.
drills in school where you duck and hide under your desk to protect yourself from a nuclear attack from Russia, which, looking back, was ludicrous.
Just a bit.
Yeah, we grew up with that. It was normal, and I think that they've grown up with a different sort of fear. It's a fear of emotional and information overload.
Yeah.
And what I like to do now is that's why I'm here in Texas, for quiet. And what I'll often do is in the middle of the day, I'll go walk 2 or 3 or 5 miles and just in quiet. And that's when my best ideas come, in quiet. And I can hear myself think. And I don't want to say I hear the voice of God, but if God wants to speak, this is the times when he will speak to me, because I'm not speaking at him.
Now, you said that earlier that you had kind of a negative experience in the church growing up. How did you maintain your faith through all of that?
Well, that's a very good question, because there's a movie that Meryl Streep did called Doubt. And the idea, she was a nun in this story, and she wrestled with this idea of what is truth and what is doubt.
Right.
And the conclusion was, she says, I have doubt. And it had more to do with not just her faith, but it had to do with the whole structure. And I'm not a trained historian, but I'm a trained theologian. So I look at the church's history, and I see that when we have gotten into power, we have almost always invariably abused it.
Yeah.
And the article I just finished for Substack just deals with that very issue, is that now the church has come back to be in power, the evangelical church. And
Yeah.
it's looking more and more like Handmaid's Tale than it ever
Yeah.
did. So, and we just don't do well in power. But my work has actually renewed my faith. So I'm no longer, I call myself a minister without portfolio. I'm defrocked. But what I'm doing is I've gone to where the need is, and I deal with people in the street who desperately need to make it through tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so I don't have to give them an answer and say, if you'll take this pill or if you'll say this poem, you'll be fine. It's an ongoing everyday process of helping somebody, just like Daniel was helped for years until he was able to reach out and help somebody else. So I say my belief is very nuanced now. I believe that there is a God, and I believe that I'm not God.
Right.
And that probably sums it up.
How do you balance maintaining what you call a tender heart while doing such emotionally challenging work?
That's an excellent question. I think what it is I remembered how many times and how many things I've done that I'm still embarrassed with, because I just didn't know. So when somebody reacts and somebody does something, and I've worked hard to teach my staff this, that let's just give him one more chance. And if he rejects it, that's on him. And so we have terminated people. We have let people go, but we've also taken people back 2 and 3 and 6 times, because maybe this time we'll catch.
Right.
And statistically, on drug rehabilitation, it often takes 7 times in rehab for it to finally catch. So I suppose it comes back to, if I quit, if I stop trying, if I give up, that would probably be the death of me. So I think how many times did my wife not give up on me when we had one more failed career?
Right.
We had to move one more time. And so if she didn't give up on me, then maybe I won't give up on him or her. And they will likely, realistically, they will fall down. But what I tell people is just get up.
Yeah.
Just try. That's all we ask. Just try.
What do you think are the main challenges to rehabilitation in today's society, other than like stigma that exists and the inability to find jobs? What do you think some of the main challenges are that you face?
Well, on one level, it's internal. If you think you're a failure, and society has proven you literally have a number that says you're a failure. So if you get into a situation where you're about to fail, it's easier to walk away.
Yeah.
It's better to quit before you're fired.
Right.
You self-censor, I call it. And also, if you're known by your felony, if you're known by your number, then people have a preconceived notion.
Yeah.
But I think the bottom line is that we're asking people, like Nancy Reagan said at one point, just say no to drugs. But that sounds great on a bumper sticker, but it just doesn't work. So if we say to somebody, you need to get a job, and what they hear is, you need to become president of the United States.
Right.
It's beyond their comprehension. I've had people who come to me who have never had a job. They don't know what to do. And now when they get out of prison, all the job applications are on their phone. So it's a whole different world.
Yeah.
So, and again, what I think it comes back to is that you can't do it on your own. You have to have a support system. So we try to offer this. The county reentry offers it. And on many levels, there are many churches out there doing the same thing. We have one church in Dayton that they pay for your license reinstatement. Or you have to get an ID. It's only $10, but most people don't have that.
Oh, exactly.
That's right. So they'll pay you. You can't get a job without an ID. And if you don't have an ID, you have to have $10. And if you don't have $10, you can't get it.
Yeah.
So I give the church, and they do it for anybody who has a legitimate request.
Why do you think the church, and I don't want to be too general or too broad, but why do you think there is a portion of the church that has kind of drifted towards this political nationalization? And what is lost in that shift?
I think we've always been tempted that direction. Dr. King had this sermon about the drum major instinct, where it's a story in the Bible about James and John came to Jesus and said, when you're in power, can we sit at your right and left hand? It makes sense. Yeah, because I want to be important in your kingdom because you are important. And he said that it's not going to happen. You have to be serving others, not lording it over them. And what happened was, as soon as the church eventually got in power, and you have the Spanish Inquisition,
right,
or you have the Salem witch trials,
yeah,
or then we have the Inquisitions that we're still seeing in many cultures. In the South, we saw it in racial issues where people were ostracized simply because of their attitudes towards racial issues. And Dr. King said his greatest regret at times was the silence of the church, because people in the church, a pastor in particular, would lose his job if he were to do that. And I think this is what I'm most concerned with, is that power, the idea of sitting at the right and the left hand, is so tempting. It's innate in all of us. We want to be the drum major. And I think the temptation is so great that this is where we are all most vulnerable. And right now, since 79, I believe it was, and moral majority started, I believe this was the beginning of what I call the decline in the effectiveness of the church. The church was most effective during the civil rights movement because it literally changed the hearts and minds of the entire nation.
Yeah.
And they did it with what they do best, service. Dr. King called it soul force. And today what we're saying is, you must change. You must come under my authority. And the people are leaving the church in droves.
Yeah, they are.
The number of people that call themselves nuns, no affiliation, has gone up incrementally, the highest level ever. And I don't blame them. I struggle to attend church today because of this reason, but I still believe.
Yeah. Well, you can believe without the church, right? I mean, you don't need that church structure so much.
Yes, absolutely. I don't encourage it, though, because what I've found is the structure itself. For example, here in Texas, I attend a Spanish Mass, and the idea of the celebration in a language I don't speak, the idea of feeling the sense of worship. It elevated me to feel like I was literally at the throne of God, and I miss that. I desperately miss that because there is an element in community that we
Right.
need. It's no different than going to a when you see when the national anthem is played and people get very emotional over that. When you hear 1,000 voices, well, it's the same thing when you hear a group coming together, singing together in unison from the heart.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great example. How do you this might be a redundant question, but how do you reconcile faith with the issues that are facing marginalized communities today?
I I think at one point I like to think of myself as just a soldier. I'd like to be a general. I'd like to be in charge. I like to give orders. But the truth is that I'm just a soldier, and I've been asked to do one menial job in one little town for this amount of time. And so, if at the end of the day I can do my job like I've been asked to do, then maybe I have one or two people that when my funeral is held, maybe they'll come and they'll say he made a difference in me. And I have found in that simple approach that we've been able. Just a practical example. My neighborhood, when we bought our house, had a lot of crime issues. But since we fixed up our house and we bought another and another and fixed them, the crime issues have disappeared in our community. So not that I get the credit, but I started the snowballing,
Right.
and and it's actually become a very comfortable little neighborhood. And I don't want to. I think if we do our little part as a soldier, we can make an impact in the greater war.
Yeah. Do you have any plans to continue expanding what you're doing?
Well, we're running at 100% capacity, so we have to expand. And my major role right now is in exactly this, sharing this message of second chances, because I don't expect you to do what we're doing, but I can encourage you to offer second chance to yourself and to someone else. And maybe if we get enough of this, particularly today, maybe this message of hope might have a broader significance, and maybe we can make a difference beyond Good Samaritan Home.
Yeah.
That's my hope.
What do you recommend to people? Because, like you said, not everybody can do what you're doing. What can people do to kind of be more active in their community and give back and kind of experience a different type of culture?
Well, here in Texas, it's 65% Hispanic. So just for me being here, I feel like I'm a minority. And that's
Right.
very humbling for me because we grew up thinking that the culture is white and everybody else is foreigner. But the truth is that and historically, the Anglos were the foreigners. They were the invaders.
Yeah.
I always find it ironic that for 300 years, Mexicans, literally, or Hispanics, lived here. This was Mexico. And then in 1836, a dozen people came in from Tennessee and said, we're coming into America. We're going to claim it for the United States, and all you foreigners have to leave. And I believe we still have that same arrogance that says those people.
Yeah.
And the truth is that we are those people. So I think what we can do is always look at ourselves as how can I learn from you?
Right.
And when I'm surrounded with the Hispanic culture, this sense of family that I never had, this sense of respect for your father, this sense of community. In my Anglo community here, we never talk to one another. But if this were a Hispanic community, I guarantee you the neighbors would know my name and they'd know when I come and go, and they'd be watching me to make sure I'm safe.
Yeah.
Because that's that sense of community.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, and that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier too, that we're so hooked on this technology. I mean, it's so funny because now you go to restaurants, and you see people gathered around a table and they're all on their phones.
Yeah.
They're not even talking to each other, their own family members, their friends. I mean, you go to a restaurant and you're just using your phone, eating food, that is really harming our society, I think.
There was a book that came out a while ago called Bowling Alone, and the concept was that bowling has declined. And it used to be a community sport where league after league after league,
Right.
every night the bowling lanes were filled with people, and it was a celebration that happened to revolve around this game. But you just don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
And you don't see the VA, the veterans, VFW, the Kiwanis Club meeting. You don't see the social clubs. Even the churches have declined because we've become more isolated,
Yes.
and then that makes you more susceptible to the rantings that come on the internet or on cable. So if all you listen to is CNN or Fox, you're going to think that that's all there is. And it's no wonder you feel so depressed because
Yeah.
this anger, when actually, if you just sit and talk to your kids, it might make the world of a difference.
Yeah.
My grandkids are my pleasure right now. They
I-
still think I'm smart.
Well, you are very intelligent, and I mean, again, I'm not just saying this, but I find a lot of inspiration in you. I mean, you're an inspiration to me.
Thank you.
The work that you're doing, and the fact is that you are making a difference. You're making a world difference, and it's a difference that you may never even recognize because you don't. It's really hard to understand the impact that we have on other people, especially when we're giving them second chances, when we're teaching them how to live to their fullest abilities. So you are making a huge difference. There's no question about that.
There are days, I'll be candid, this is probably one of them, when I feel like I'm shoveling shit against the tide. It's just exhausting.
Yeah.
You're dealing with this problem or that problem, and most of it is when you're dealing with people that need a lot of support, it can be draining. And there are days I simply have to say to myself, you do the right thing because it's the right thing, and you may never know the results. But like Dr. King said, all he wanted to remember at his funeral was that don't look at my rewards, don't look at my Nobel Peace Prize, or don't look at my degrees. Just remember that I tried to do God's will.
Yeah.
I tried to help somebody as I passed along. That's all I want too.
Yeah. What have you? Well, before I get to my next question, I'm dying to know, why did you pick Texas?
Texas historically has always been a place of second chances. I came here in '83 with my construction business because we were starving in the north. So I heard Texas had a good economy, so I came down here and we did well. But what I found out was that all the way since 1830, Texas was a place where people who had failed in Appalachia in the South, like Sam Houston, Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, James Travis, all those people had failed in their home states, and they came to Texas to start over. And it was so common, in fact, that you could go through all of Appalachia and see on farms a sign that said, scribbled, GTT, gone to Texas. People literally abandoned their farms and went to Texas to start over. So, and that's what I did, because I believe Texas is more than welcoming to people who want to work hard. Politics aside, if you're willing to work hard. And so I came down here and I stayed for years until I decided to go back to get my graduate degree. But when I wanted to write, I came back with that same attitude. This is my second chance to do that novel I planned 50 years ago. And it worked out very well.
Wow.
It's a physical second chance for me here.
Interesting. I didn't know that about Texas.
Yeah. It's a paradoxical place. They're very, very welcoming, but very private.
Right.
I may not. Here's how we say hello in Texas. And that's it.
What strategies have you found to be most effective for changing public perception about rehabilitation and about forgiveness in general?
Well, we could talk about it. But I think the only thing, even the churches, when somebody would say, well, he's given his heart to Jesus and he's a changed life, that really doesn't resonate with anybody because everybody loves Jesus in jail, particularly if it gets me a pardon.
Right.
But what matters is, what have you done day to day to day? I have one of our former residents named Walter who was 16 when he was arrested, and he was 9 years in prison. So he came out of prison, and he was homeless, and he came to us when he was 26 years old or so, and he had no skills, no formal education. But one of our friends, our mentor, offered him a job in a winery, and he's worked there for the past 10 years, and he's worked his way into management. And he's now married, he has a child, and he's a taxpayer. So we can talk about rehabilitation all day long, but Walter is a living example of what it looks like.
Right.
And he bought a house in my neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
And I never hear a word from him. He's very quiet. He just goes to work like a normal person. And I give him all the credit for that. So I think that's, if you can encourage somebody, just go to work, come home, keep your grass clean, keep your yard mowed, and just be a good neighbor and let your feet do the talking.
But there's still that public perception question. Have you, I mean, you went from a lot of resistance. I imagine that's dissipated now that you've shown that this is a successful program and that people can be safe with this in their neighborhoods.
Yeah, I can walk down the street and people ignore me. You're absolutely right. When the hostility was so great at one point, it was the closest thing I ever felt to being a black man in a white society, where just your very presence made people angry.
Yeah.
And that has dissipated, absolutely. But it's left scars. So I'm still very careful. I'm still very leery. But it's a process. That's the best way to describe it.
How does second, third, fourth, fifth chances relate to society's expectations of success?
Well, maybe I can relate that to my staff because what the staff will say was that he was difficult. He didn't abide by the rules. He needs to be terminated. He needs to be gone. Or when he wants to come back, we say, well, he did this then. Why should we take him back? But by what we do is by offering him another chance, we say volumes to him. But we may start off by saying, we're going to have what we call a zero tolerance policy, where we're not going to, we have you still accountable, but we're not going to hold you to that past. We're going to give you one more chance. But what it speaks to my staff is that second chance is an ongoing process. And it's taken years, but I hear them say, we're going to give him a second chance on this, or my first instinct was, but we're going to do this one more time. So I see that they're finally getting it. And I think that's how the community is. That now I get calls from the policemen saying, will you take this person in? Or the courts will call and say, we have somebody on probation. Can you take them in? Because they know that they'll get a safe place with us.
Right. Yeah, and I imagine that there is such an untapped need for the services that you're providing. And that's kind of disheartening because it is such a successful model. And I'm glad to hear that you're expanding. But why is the system, like the corrections and the criminal justice system, why are we still so hell bent on this idea of prison?
Same reason we're going to have this purge of anybody who's not born here, because there's a knee-jerk reaction that says you did something wrong or you're not one of us. You have to be gone, and that's why during the at the outbreak of World War II, we immediately removed the Japanese because we were so afraid of those people, and I find it reprehensible. I can't even fathom that somebody's skin color would be a barrier. It was something that had nothing to do with your character and everything to do with your melanin. So But we always need some way to find somebody that I can blame. And I think that prison is a way of saying you committed a crime, you have to be punished. Like one fellow said, uh, I think they should be shot, and he was an educated person. And another fellow who was as an attorney said, I think all your people should go somewhere else, not in our town. And that's common because the idea is that if out of sight, out of mind, out of
Yeah.
heart, we just don't care. I think it's a human reaction. And going back to the Bible again, when Jesus was most comfortable was with the lepers, the outcasts, the woman at the well, who was an outcast among the outcasts. She was a woman, she was a Samaritan, and she was living in an immoral situation. And he not only talked to her, he took a drink with her cup, which was unheard of. It made him a defiled person. But he said that he was most comfortable with the outcasts because they needed him the most.
Right.
And that's how I feel too. I'm most comfortable with outcast persons because they need my help the most.
That's amazing. Your philosophy on life is really inspiring in itself. I just again I want to thank you for everything that you do.
Well, being here has really helped me because I'm able to talk these things out because I had my butt dragging the ground today, feeling sorry for myself, and sometimes I need to be reminded that what we're doing is still worth the time and effort.
Yeah.
Uh, I want to say thank you, Sean.
Do you ever feel? I mean, I imagine that you must feel exhausted a lot by what's going on, just by what you're doing. Do you ever get the sense that sometimes you just want to give up? And how do you overcome that feeling? How do you get back on your feet?
Uh, I would say yes. I won't gloss over it because trust me, I'm no Mother Teresa. Even she dealt with depression.
Yeah.
So I would say that I feel most well. I feel my best when I can have some sort of meaningful conversation with somebody, uh, and and it's usually I ask this one question: how can I help? And that's about all I say, and let them do the talking. How can I help? See, I have found that when the church has a tendency to say, you need to look like us, you need to act like
Right.
us, and you need to stop being whatever you were and be like us. And what we learned to ask is one question: are you hungry? And that is the language they hear and they understand. And
Yeah.
it's amazing what people will do, how they'll relax and they'll open up when they feel like you really do want to help.
I imagine that there's a lot of shame and embarrassment and just a lot of emotional baggage that comes when you come out of prison that you probably have to counter, and it's probably difficult to ask for help.
I'm going to say something very carefully that the people who are coming out of prison who have committed what we call acceptable crimes, uh, even the petty theft or even drug use, those are acceptable in the community. But and we don't deal with much in the violent crime area. But the people who are struggling the most with housing in particular are those who have committed what we call the unforgivable sins,
Right.
sexual sins, because the community hates a sex offender with a passion. And I understand that. What they've done is reprehensible, but many times it was a result of their own sexual abuse in childhood. Doesn't make what they've done any better,
Right.
but they are lepers. And so I have found that these are outcasts among the outcasts among the outcasts. So about 30 and 40% of our residents might have committed some sort of unforgivable crime. And in the eyes of the community, they can never be rehabilitated. even though statistically it's what we call often a Romeo and Juliet situation,
Right.
where he was simply a year too old and she was a year too young. And it was consensual, but it doesn't matter. They
Yep.
committed a crime. He did. And so we never ask what you've done, because the truth is it doesn't matter. You're here. You need help. How can I help?
Right.
And I'm not glossing over in the least what they've done, but the reality is they've been released legally. What are we going to do with it?
Right.
We're going to shoot them. If we shoot them, then what's that make of me and my
Right.
culture? And what will happen to us? Because if you shoot him today, tomorrow they may shoot somebody who's done something equally as offensive in somebody else's eyes.
Right.
So, it's I guess the idea is if we don't do something, it will change us, and I'm not willing to pay that price.
Yeah. My philosophy is everybody deserves a second chance. Everybody deserves forgiveness, no matter how heinous the crime might be. That doesn't mean that they can't change. That doesn't mean that they can't change and grow as a human being and learn from their mistakes and make a difference in the world themselves. Why is that so hard for so many people to kind of come to terms with? Is it fear? Do you think it's like a sex offender? Or is it just fear? Is it just not understanding? It just seems like it's so easy to dehumanize people.
You've answered it right there. It's just so easy to dehumanize because uh, in the South, I think much of what I understand, the idea of the racial divide was
Yeah.
among the poor whites was at least we had the blacks to look down on.
Right.
We have to have somebody who's struggling more than me, and they have to. I'm never the bottom rung as long as I have somebody else.
Right.
And I think in our culture, even in prison, there's a hierarchy of offenses. And there are people who have committed what's considered to be acceptable crimes, and then there are the outcasts in prison, and they are the targets. And again, those are the ones who desperately need the help. And we never say that we approve of anything you've done, but we just move on and say, how can we help you
Right.
today?
How can we help you to become a better person? How can we help you to overcome your past?
That's right.
Yeah, I love that message. I want to ask you, how does your concept, and I don't know if you've given much thought to this, but how does your concept of habilitation address the structural inequalities that we have in society at large?
Well, I grew up in a working class family, and I never realized it at the time, but I went to school with many people who grew up in professional families. Their parents were teachers, lawyers, doctors, and they grew up with the assumption that you're going to go to college, you're going to become a professional, you're going to live in this neighborhood,
Right.
and I had none of that, so, because I was a working class family, and how much more so if I had grown up in a family where there was no structure at all, and there was no a single parent or no parent. So I think we have to deal with education. We have to deal with available working jobs. And right now, we have ample jobs available, but they're almost all service oriented.
Yeah.
And so, at least in the mills where we grew up, you could have a steady job, a stable job, where you could work enough to support your family, and your wife stayed home with the kids, and it created that degree of stability. But now we can't do that. It seems like we're built on two jobs, and
Yeah.
that creates its own problems. So this is where it's a community effort. You have society involved with education, involved with jobs, and making it available. And this is where it's where we have to look at the macro problem, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You've talked a lot about working with a range of people. You've worked with young people, you've worked with older people, and I'm curious: are there unique challenges that older individuals face in finding their purpose later in life?
We have one fellow who's been incarcerated for 50 years,
Wow.
And he was just released. So imagine what it's like 50 years in a 6 by 12 cell where everything in life was regimented around the count and going to the meals. And now he's in a place where they say, you need to make your own decisions. You need to, it's a frightening world. And what we're trying to do with him is just simply make sure he can be comfortable with it. He'll get his Social Security, and so he'll get a minimum, maybe $900 a month, so he can at least live the remainder of his life in peace. But if you have somebody who's 18 years old, who's been in the county jail, or maybe did a short bit in prison, we have found with the young ones, they're much harder to work with.
Really?
Because the young one says, I'm smarter than you. I can do this myself. I don't need your help. And they're still trying to prove themselves. So
Right.
they have their risk score is higher simply because of that. And so I like dealing with somebody who has no options. Somebody at the bottom. Remember that movie called Officer and a Gentleman?
Yes.
Well, Richard Gere had this shoulder. He was always pushing things around, trying to get his own way. And the sergeant tried to break him and break him and break him. And he got him to the point where he said, quit, quit. I want you to quit. And he says, I can't. I've got nowhere else to go. And that to me is that's where people are finally ready to listen when they have no options. And that's why in our house, if somebody says, I have nothing else, I have nowhere to go, I just need help, then we can work with them.
That is very interesting because I would have always thought that dealing with younger individuals would be an easier process. But now, what you said also makes a lot of sense because they are trying to kind of prove themselves. They want to do it on their own. And it's probably more difficult to ask for help.
Well, think of it like a 21-year-old is probably 14 years old emotionally on a
Right.
good day. In fact, all our residents have arrested development in that somewhere along the line they haven't grown into the adults that you and I normally would be given responsibility. They're still saying, I want this for me. And so that's why I say we're trying to change pronouns because adults say we, children say I.
Right.
And so sometimes prison has a way of teaching you that you can't do it on your own. You will need help.
What are some common misconceptions about people who need second and third chances?
I would say is that what you've done is unforgivable. You've already been given a second chance. Why should we give you another?
Right.
And I think we tend to giving somebody a second chance can be exhausting because you will be disappointed. They will let you down. It's no different than your kids in high school. They're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And the difference is they're your kids and you can't put them out. But there are days you'd like to.
Well, and there are some parents that do.
And there are some parents that do. You're right.
Well, that brings me back to a question that I've been kind of wanting to ask you since we started. Can you share, because I agree with your philosophy on this 100%. Can you share a bit about the concept of normal people and why it's important to challenge that notion?
I heard the phrase that normal is just a setting on my dryer. There is no normal. Normal is always, what we see as normal is the other person who seems to have it all.
Right.
And I want his standard. And on the phone or on television in the movies, we see normal as everybody is good looking. Everybody is driving a fancy car. They all live in California and they're all happy. And the truth is that none of that's true because we have a mistaken, and now we do it on the reels on Facebook where normal seems to be what we're seeing on the phone. But normal is where you are today. That's your normal. So
Yeah.
what are you going to do with it? And for me, I had to realize that I have to work harder to find my place. So I had to make a lot of mistakes, but I was fortunate enough that by 53, I found a place where I could do that. But I still had a lot of damage. I have what I call a limp, an emotional limp, where I'll never run as fast as someone else because of where I came from.
Wow.
So forget normal. That's what I'm saying.
Well, we're right, because people are products of their environment.
Absolutely. And you have that parent who, I'll give you an example. My father grew up without a father. So when he was raising 3 boys, he had no idea what to do.
Right.
So he just didn't. He disappeared. And my mother grew up in the Depression in abject poverty because she had a father who couldn't work because of physical issues. So
Right.
she grew up where she lived on charity. So that was always her limp. So I grew up with a family where normal was where we had all these issues in the house. And so I had to learn how to be a parent, how to be a husband, and without having been taught that.
Right.
That's why it took me so long.
What societal structures do you think contribute to cycles of incarceration?
But I like to blame my generation because in the 60s we said that you can have it all. We rejected the structure of the 50s because our parents came out of the Depression.
Right.
And they wanted to have a middle class living. So they worked very hard at that. And they wanted the peace and security that the post-war era brought. And we started saying, we grew up without any of those disciplines that they had. And so we said, I just want to feel free. So we rejected all of that. And we said, we want free love. We want all these free benefits. We want San Francisco, where everybody just loves one another. And what we ended up with was the San Francisco filled with homeless people who are drug addicted and struggling and
Yes.
overwhelmed the city structure. And we now have a culture, I believe, that is paying the price for this whole concept of benefits without accountability.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, what was it? Give me the original question again, Sean.
Well, I was just wondering, what societal structures do you think contribute to cycles of incarceration? And
Yeah, what happened? That's where here. As a result of that, we had a backlash in the late 60s and 70s against we had a law and order backlash, and Richard Nixon rode that law and order into office. And that's why when you had Nancy Reagan say, just say no to drugs. And that's when we started the mass incarceration, because drugs in particular have become so rampant and all of the societal issues with it that we said, let's just lock them up. And what we're going through now, again, we found it didn't work. And we were building prisons and filling prisons, and everybody is released from prison eventually. So now we're trying to come back. But what's happening now in this current political situation is we're going to get, it's going to be immigration, but it's going to be a multitude of other issues. We're simply going to say, throw them out.
Yeah.
We're done with that. Lock them up and send them back to Mexico. And it's just not going to work. And I believe that most of what we go through is cyclical, that we will go through this, but then we'll come through it and we will survive. But it's going to be a difficult time, and history is replete with these cycles of going left and right, and we just have to be steady through it all.
Do you see any challenges with Good Samaritan Home in the current political climate?
Oh, I like to think that we can ride through both sides of the political spectrum because we have something that both sides benefit from.
Right.
But I have a slogan that as the state giveth, the state taketh away. So because most of our work is primarily funded through our contract with the state, we could lose it. And so I've made contingency plans. What happens if? And the answer is maybe we could do what Albert Schweitzer did, where he played the organ on his concerts so he could fund his mission in Africa. So maybe I'll have to keep writing to fund Good Samaritan Home.
Well, that brings me to my next question. Why do you believe that storytelling is a very effective way to advocate for social change?
Well, if I were to talk to you about, I'd like to have a talk to you about travel safety on a ship. And you would say, what do you mean? Well, we make sure you have enough lifeboats, and you make sure that you're prepared with safety drills. And you would never hear me. But if I had a picture of two young lovers from a different culture and put them on the Titanic and made it into a romance, you would suddenly realize that ship safety is incredibly important, because without it, Jack and Rose would never have met, and maybe they could have lived together.
Right.
So what I'm trying to do is tell the story of second chances in a way that emotionally you'll hear it and share it, so that you'll identify with Daniel Robinson and Kate and his children and say, that's me. And people will hear that story. They'll feel that story. And that's what my goal is.
Are you planning on writing another novel?
I've got the first chapter on a sequel called Requiem, following up what happens after. And the truth is that I put so much emotion into this story that it's very hard to get back into it, particularly now with all the work in the publication.
Yeah.
But so what I am doing is I'm trying to do spotty writing, where my Substack or even my videos, I'm having the same message in a much quicker format, and I'm trying to generate conversations in our culture on second chances.
And I
want us talking about it.
Let me just pause there, because you mentioned Substack, and I just want our radio listeners to be able to follow you. It's johndavidgraham.substack.com. That's johndavidgraham.substack.com. And I really encourage my listeners to check out the Substack. It's amazing. It's inspiring. So please go subscribe. It's fantastic.
And it's free.
And it's free. Yes.
By the way, for those who are frugal among us, you can download some free chapters of my book too, if you like, off Amazon.
Oh, really? And you've also got a website. I don't have the banner for it. What is the website to Good Samaritan Home?
Oh, Good Samaritan Home is very simple. GoodSamaritanHome.org.
.org. Okay.
Yeah, and that talks about Good Samaritan programs and such. And so you check it out, and you can contact me either way. I'd be glad to help you with any issues you have in mind.
Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and I want to thank you. I regrettably we're out of time. I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for coming on the show and being so gracious with your time. And I wish you the best of luck. Can people donate to Good Samaritan Home?
I'm not asking for donations. What I really would like people to do is share the story. If you want to donate something, spend it on the book.
Spend it on the book.
Yeah, it's Audible. It's print. It's a ebook. So it's available in all formats. But I would love to have you read the story and share it with others. And it'll be like Jack and Rose. It'll be a story that you can share. And it's a love story, it's a coming of age story, but it's a second chance story.
Yeah.
And I think it'll make a difference in someone's life like it has mine.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it this weekend, and I'm glad to hear that there's an Audible version. I was just going to ask you if there was an Audible version.
We just finished that, and the actor who did the voice said that he had to get in touch with emotions he never had done before, and he was just so exhausted at the end of the process because he lived Daniel for 4 months as he did this book.
Well, I hope you'll come back on the show, because there's so much more to talk about, and I've had a great conversation with you. So again, thank you so much, and thank you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you. I'm an introvert, and I'm brain dead after this talk now. I want you to know that. Go on.
I can relate as well, and I just want to send a message to my audience during these tough, difficult political times. Be kind, be curious, and be yourself. That is the message that I want to leave people with. I want to thank my guest, John David Graham, founder of Good Samaritan Home and the author of, let's put the book back up real quick, Running as Fast as I Can. So please check out the website, check out the Substack, get the book. Get the book. It's available on Amazon and pretty much every place where books are available, correct?
Yes, it can be had. We've got multiple formats, so it can be had.
Perfect. Thank
You're
you
a
so
good man,
much.
Sean. Thank you.
Thank you. And this has been Coup Save America. We will see you next Tuesday.